Hi, good afternoon, everyone. We have such a rich conversation to get to today, so I want to very briefly introduce my esteemed panelists here. Their lengthy bios are accessible by the app, so I'm just going to hit a very few highlights. Perry Peltz is a journalist and documentary filmmaker. Amongst her many accomplishments is bringing Axios documentary series to HBO in the last year. Perry has done that with Matt O'Neill, also a documentary filmmaker. Perry and Matt together worked very hard to bring you the film that you're going to be treated to seeing a bit of today. And that brings me to Delua Shannon, who is a subject of today's film, and you will get to know her as we have had the privilege of doing. And that in and of itself, believe me, if you didn't already feel like you were in the right place, you will 100% know for sure that you are in the right place today. Without further ado, we'd like to share just a bit of the film, alternate endings, with you. So if you'll turn your attention here. Okay, so we're all on the same proverbial page to start, but tell us, how did you come to make a film about death?
It's a great question. And actually, this film started as a film about longevity. And it was going to be about all the things out there that are keeping people alive longer. And the executive producer at the time, a woman named Sheila Nevins, who ran HBO documentary films, about 3 months in, called us and said, stop. We have it all wrong. We are so focused as a society about staying alive longer that we've all forgotten the fact that we're all going to die. And what emerged out of that process is a film about the ways that people are embracing the end of life.
And I think that, I mean, it was with some trepidation that we first approached this whole topic, because documentaries already have a reputation as being the medicine of cinema, right? Is that the people who are always sort of dread being lectured to or talked at or made to see the worst things in the world and feel worse about the world they live in. And what we discovered through this is that death can be an important part of life. And if not a part of life, like you can still mourn the loss of life, but it's something we're all going to face. And over the course of this project and over the course of the people that we spent time with and the people we filmed with, we have felt empowered and even inspired by the ways in which people are confronting the end of life and changing the way we confront the end of life.
And so we have Delua here, who is a subject of this film, but how did you find the people who were willing to share their stories with you? And how did you choose the stories that you wanted to share?
You know, I think, first of all, it's worth mentioning, and it's obvious, it's obvious in some ways, but documentary films, especially about difficult topics, don't get made without a very generous, spirited people who agree to participate in these films. And Matt and I, just cannot say enough, first of all, that Delua is here with us, and her family, Will Corbett and Desiree Corbett as well, who you'll come to know in a little bit. So we thank them for doing that. And it's hard. It's hard to open your life up. It's hard to open your life up when somebody's following you with a camera. But that is how these stories get made. And as far as how we selected the stories,
it was a range. I mean, we started at a funeral convention. That first scene is actually the first thing that we shot to see what was changing. The overriding theme that we kept on returning to was control and ownership and change, like a really embracing death and changing the way we acknowledge death. So we went everywhere from funeral conventions to religious leaders to organizations involved with medical aid in dying to a rising profession of death doulas, the sort of midwives of the end of life, and tried to find the right people who were willing to open themselves up and allow us to be with them through the whole process of the decision making and the ideas and really understand their inspiration.
And so really you're with entire families, entire communities of people who were deciding how they wanted not just to end life, but to mark and celebrate their lives. Tell us a little bit more about the stories that maybe particularly spoke to you or the most surprising in your reactions.
I think surprising is probably an important word. We were looking, as you saw in the open of the film, the death industry is being disrupted in a very big way. You saw that statistic that cremation is now more popular than traditional burials, and people are looking for ways in which they can be and participate in what is the end of their lives with their families. And it was an incredible exploration for us to go through. I think that when you think about a film about death, you think it's going to be depressing and sad, and yes, there are moments that are that. Death is sad. Losing someone you love is obviously horrifically sad. But the process is something that can be a little bit different, and we were looking for stories that kind of touched on that theme.
Excuse me. The other thing I would say, actually,
Take
just
some
give me a
water.
moment.
Yeah, of course.
Take some water.
But that's how we looked for it. We looked for stories. We cast a very, very wide net. We met with lots of different families. We looked at lots of different stories, and it took a while for us in this process to find the stories that we would ultimately tell.
Mm-hmm. So, Dulua, in a moment, everyone here is going to see the part of the film that features you and your husband. How did Perry and Matt find you?
Well, let me give you a little bit of background first. Mm-hmm. Dick and I had gone to some alternative kinds of death doula talks and so forth. In our little town, there is a group called Full Circle Living and Dying Collective. And so we had gone to some of their meetings, and so there was an interest there. We had also, unbeknownst to us, about 3 months before Dick was diagnosed with cancer, we had gone down to the state legislature and testified in favor of the End of Life Options Act. And so when we got a call from folks that said they're from HBO and could they please film us, after this was after Dick was diagnosed, we both looked at one another and thought, no way, are they nuts? And I'm envisioning lights and please move over here and could you talk, here's the script we'd like you to do, or could you say that 2 more times so that I get it just right? And I thought, no, this is way out of our ballpark.
And what was the turning point?
How did we get from there to here?
Oh, great.
No, I'm kidding, I'm joking.
Tell us what they, how did you finally decide? I mean, you both were against just letting people into your story, but what was that moment where you both said, okay, we're gonna do this?
We said no, they said, how about maybe, and could we fly out from New York and talk to you? So we thought, sure, go ahead. And so they flew out, they talked to us for about an hour, and as they were talking, first of all, my husband was thinking, oh, this is a really good way that we could tell people that there is an option. And so that, for him, sparked an interest. For me, I was looking for, can this still be a private time? How would this film be made? What is the expectation from us? And once Matt and Perry kept reassuring me, that there is no script, we do what we do, however it turns out, it turns out. There's no prescribed ending to it. There's no all of that. Then I said, well, if our kids and their families feel like that's all right, let's talk with them. So they stayed over and talked with the rest of the family. And
So you really got your
we
whole,
really,
it was a family
definitely,
decision.
because if the family had said, no, this does not feel good, we would have said no.
Well, I think the idea of it being a family decision really takes us into this next section of the film, your section, Dick's section. So let's all turn our attention again to the screen. Okay, let's take a breath.
Ooh.
Right. First of all, thank you
Sure.
for being here with us.
As you can tell, I'm not the subject of the film. I'm here because Dick couldn't be.
And I wanted to ask you, I mean, for us, you are a subject because of the exquisite thing that you did for Dick, not just in really shepherding him and your whole family through this process, but also by speaking to, not just to us, but all of the conversations that you have started, even that you've had since you've been here, because we don't know how to do this. So you have so much wisdom that you could share with us, but we realize that also comes not without an insignificant amount of pain. I wonder, there was the moment where you said, we've said everything to each other that we need to say.
Yes.
And before we watched this segment, you had mentioned that somewhat coincidentally that you and Dick had participated in some advocacy before Dick even knew that he was terminally ill.
Yes.
Had you and Dick, before you needed to, had you talked about what each of you wanted in death? Had you talked about how you wanted to live your life, what you would consider dignified, what you would feel for yourself would be undignified? Are these conversations that you ever had before you were in a place where you really needed to have them?
Not in the way, not with this kind of ending. We had filled out what's called a 5 wishes form, which is pages of how you'd like to be treated, how would you like music in the room, more of an environment and the amount of medical care that you might want. We had never envisioned this. This came from Dick knowing that he was terminal from the very beginning. What you saw there was after 2 years of treatment at Stanford. We made 18 trips to Stanford, and they told him right from the beginning, you have 6 months to 2 years. And we thought, 2 years, we'll go for that. So we did any number of alternative things. We started researching, and while Stanford he was doing the traditional chemotherapy for his cancer, but his cancer was a very rare cancer. His surgeon said there's probably 50 people in the US that have that. So it wasn't, he knew. So there wasn't that some cancer patients have, where you think, if I just do this, it'll be cured. Or the doctors get into a position where, am I cured yet? Is it gone yet? And so in this case, his surgeon said, you're going to die with this disease. And so we thought, okay, well, if that's going to happen, let's at least do it the way we'd like to do it. And so then we started talking about, okay, how would we like to do this? What would we do?
And you say very intentionally, you say, what would we like to do?
Yes.
Who started? Was that the way the conversation started? Was that as a we? Or did Dick already have some specific thoughts about how he wanted to die?
He did not. I tended to be we were very much of a team throughout our marriage, and I tended to be, my role was think of these weird things to do and let's go try them. His role was more, wait a minute, let's think this out. Okay, yes, let's go. We got it. Let's set a goal. Let's go do it. So we did. He knew right away that he wanted to be cremated. So he said, what do we know about being cremated? And we thought, we don't know anything. Why don't we do a family field trip to the crematorium? So we called the mortuary and said, we'd like to bring our family and come over and look at the crematorium. And they said, well, it's an unusual request, but we could do it. It's in an industrial area, and it's not really set up for families, but if you would like to do that. So we did. We went over and looked at it, and they showed us through the whole place and walked Dick through what would happen. And when we left, he said, I'm really glad I did that. I feel more at ease with what's going to happen. I'm really glad that happened that way.
Mm-hmm. It seems like so much also of this process, even what you just shared with us about taking a family field trip to see how cremation takes place, and even the response that you got when you phoned. They don't get a lot of call for that.
No.
You really did have to be almost pioneering and ask the questions that nobody usually asks. Was there any point along the way where, as this was becoming more of a reality and your role in it was becoming more of a reality, your family's role, where you expressed to Dick or maybe just thought to yourself, I don't know if I can do this?
No, I never thought that I couldn't do it. I wasn't sure what Dick would end up doing, and we kept that door always open. We kept saying, especially after HBO came on board, just because HBO is filming, you do not have to follow through with this. Just because we have the medicine up in the cupboard, you do not have to follow through. You're welcome to, end this however you would like to do it, and we'll support you in that. But in fact, that was a concern of mine, because I thought he's going to think, oh my goodness, all these people are here. And we kept talking. Even the night before, in the morning, I kept saying, are you sure? And he said, yes, I'm sure. Dick had always said, I do not want to be a burden. That's his pain was not from the cancer. His pain was a mental pain of being helpless, of being unable to do for himself. And that's what drove him is, I don't want to be a burden. And so I want this to end on my terms and end before I get to the point where I can't swallow the medication, or before I can't do that. And so that was when we started kind of laying out, what would you like? How do we want this to happen? And the deal sort of in our family between Dick and I has always been, whoever, if it's your body, you get to choose. So at the beginning of our marriage, it was about haircuts and, clothes colors or something. As we went on, it became more serious until we got to this, where Dick said, absolutely, I'm doing end-of-life medication. And it was, okay, it's your body, you get to choose. So if that's what you want to do, let's do it. And my son-in-law always says, when we do things, we're all in. So we thought, all right, let's learn everything we can about it. Let's figure out what we want to do. So we did, we had the death doula of our area talk to us about how what the options were after Dick died. I had worked in the hospital, and I had experience with people dying. And
I noticed that, by the way, that when Dick's breathing became labored,
Yes.
that even in that moment that you also were able to say to your
Yes.
family and everyone who was gathered, this is part of the process. And I had wondered how you knew that, because I don't know how many people in the room have had this same experience, but I would venture to say very few of us. So I had wondered how you knew that.
we had read information, read about what it's like to die. Hospice had information, and they don't always give it out. But if you keep asking, if you say, I'm interested in this.
So you really had to push even
Yes.
for that information.
Push, I'm not sure if push is the right word, express an interest. And because a lot of people would rather not know. And so hospice tends to be sensitive to what you want. But if you start asking questions, they're happy to fill it in. You just have to make sure you want to hear the answer, because sometimes that's hard.
And I want to know, you were there, and just talking about how distanced most of us are from death, its realities, from what it's like to be present in a room where a loved one exits, to be present with someone who has exited. There's no way that you can make a film like this and not also be personally affected. What was it like to be there with Dick and Delua and the family in this extraordinary moment?
I mean, for both of us, and I think this is true for all of us, it became we were part of this period of time in an intimate way, and it felt totally natural and a privilege to be there, because it was something that we had discussed so much. And something that Dick had talked about so much. I mean, and you see the conversations, just a few of them in the car. Like, we understood the higher purpose of being there. It was still, I was sad that day, and sad to know Dick for a short time, but learned so much through the process, and learned so much from him and from you, so that we were totally in it, as part of that moment.
What I would add is we didn't want Dick to die. We came to know Dick pretty well, and the family pretty well, and became a part of this process. And Delua talks about, and this is something I'm sure that a lot of people are thinking about, she speaks about the fact that she didn't want him to feel any pressure, because the two of us were there representing HBO. And I think that we can say with 100% conviction that Dick was very, very clear about what he was doing, about our presence being there, and the fact that he wanted everyone in this room and everyone who will see this film to know that he was choosing to do this because this was the way he wanted to live his life. Dick didn't want to die. He loved his life. He loved his family. But he wanted to go out on his own terms. And I think that's something that Matt and I talked about a lot, about the presence of a camera and what that meant, and felt with absolute certainty that this was a choice that he was making very clearly.
And I can tell you that I had no concept of you guys even being in the room. I mean, it was like I had no concept at all. The other piece that we haven't talked about was what we did afterward, because Dick said, after I die, do whatever you want, because in our planning phase, I mean, that sounds flippant, but he was saying, I want to plan up to the time that I die. Beyond that. And so I thought, after being married for so long, and I couldn't have the mortician show up an hour later and take him. I just couldn't do it. And so I said, what if, I know that the death doulas talk about keeping somebody at home for 3 days. What if we did that? You think we could do it? And in California, you can stay home for 3 days. There's rules about after 24 hours, you have to be iced. And the death doula talked to us about how you would do that. And we assigned somebody to go over to the grocery store and get dry ice. And so it was Dick's choice, first of all, to have the casket that he and Will made in the living room on the coffee table when he took the medication. I said, you know, wouldn't you feel better if we moved it like maybe after you died? And he said, no, I want it right there. So we did that. So after he died, and you know, we all just took a breath and chilled for a while. We had put a sheet on the couch and under him a black one, because he knew I'd be into the whole color thing. So we picked out the black sheet. And so we all got around, carried an edge of the sheet, and with the sheet still under him, put him into the casket, put other fabric that we had over the lower half. We gave him the silver dollar eucalyptus because that had meaning in our life, in our married life. And then we just had him there with us. And for me personally, that was very, very helpful to make a transition, to feel like he was there, but he really wasn't there. And I needed that. I needed that transition time. And so at the end of, well, we had, at first I thought, I'm not going to ask the community. We live in what's called a co-housing community of all senior folks. And so I thought, oh, I don't want everybody coming through. And then after about the second day, I thought, yeah, I'm ready to do that. So I put out an email to everybody, our neighbors. And so neighbors came and just stopped and came in and talked. And then we called the mortician and said, you know, we're ready tomorrow to do the cremation. And so we had decided, in light of the type of casket and the way our life is, that we were going to take the casket to the crematorium. And so...
And you all took the casket yourself?
Yes. Mm-hmm. So we put the casket on I don't know, a gizmo with wheels on it, a dolly, thanks, and put it in the elevator. And we had done a dry run a few weeks earlier to see if it would fit into the elevator, and it did. So we put it in the elevator. We went downstairs. Everybody in the community was there with silver dollar eucalyptus branches, and Will played the Amazing Grace. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And we pushed the casket out through the pathway, through the community, and out to Will's pickup truck. We put it in the back of the pickup truck and took it to the crematorium.
It's the intentionality that went with everything. And also thank you for sharing with us how you all chose. I think it's wonderful that Dick then left to all of you to have your choice and,
yes.
and how you were going to begin your mourning process.
Yeah.
I know that there have to be so many questions here, so
sure.
I want to go ahead and open up to questions and answers. We have a question here. Wait for the microphone, please. If you could just wait for the microphone, please, so we can all hear you.
I don't want to ask a question. I just want to thank you on behalf of everybody.
Sure.
I think I saw a hand over here. Okay, thank you.
Hi, thank you so much once more, for sharing your experience and your family's experience. I guess I just, you are an incredibly strong woman, which I think, was a takeaway from this movie and this film. And I personally, my grandparents are aging right now, and I'm seeing them have a very hard time with the concept of death and dying. And being 23, I don't have authority, to tell them, how to age on their own terms. But I do wonder, what is the role of family in death and dying, and how do you practice death and dying in your everyday life? Because, you obviously went through so much, emotional and mental preparation for this. And yeah, again, thank you for sharing this.
Sure.
It's a wonderful question. How family plays a role. Your family just
Family is right here.
right here also.
Desiree and Will, could you stand up and everybody thank you for sharing your story.
Do you want to say something? I do. Talk loud, Des.
Can we get a mic here? Thank you.
So we were very lucky growing up that we were raised to speak frankly, and I think that was huge in this whole process. We all spoke to each other frankly about how we were going to handle this, and Mom said right at the beginning that she wanted us on board before she would go along with HBO, and that was part of it. We talked about it. Well, Dad's message is pretty important, and we all knew that this legislation was very important to them. They went through the whole process of testifying before Dad was even diagnosed, and the discussions about the aging and the death and dying needs to start well before the death and dying becomes reality. That frank discussion amongst families is huge. So that's my part.
Thank you.
The other thing I think is that it's a very awkward discussion. I mean, when I was working so often, I was an occupational therapist, so often I would go into people's rooms and work with them, and they would say to me, "Dear, I'm ready to die, but my family just won't let me go." And I thought, how sad, and it's not that everybody's going to choose to use end-of-life medication, but at least if they could talk about death and dying and what you want and what you see and how much treatment you want. Medicine nowadays will treat you as long as you way beyond what you can tolerate.
So just having even giving someone the permission
Yes.
to talk and put aside your own feelings and your own discomfort.
Yes.
Great.
Thank you again for your generosity.
Certainly.
It's been a generous week and never more generous than today. Have you noticed anything different after this incredible family event about the relationships in your family? As your family was already incredible, have you noticed anything having done this together that is different than it was before?
I don't know about different. I think it was a unique experience for all of us, and that in itself brought us closer together. I don't know. I don't know if I've noticed a difference, because we still speak frankly about it, and so I don't know that I could answer that. Will, did you want to say something?
Are we working? Okay. So relative to that, what I would say is that for myself, I was sort of forced into this new, patriarchal role. What do we call it? Dick was the leader of our side of the family, obviously, and then now we're not. And so for me, there's a change there in terms of my feeling of responsibility to our little part of that family. So maybe that's somewhat of an answer to what you're talking about. I guess, yeah. I think it's important. What you see in here is a great snapshot of Dick, but I think it's important to point out that this is a guy who, through his whole life, was not going to be controlled or dictated by anybody but himself. And so it's the perfect ending to a life lived in that way. Always took charge of his situation, as Delua mentioned that I commented. They were involved with many, many organizations, activities, et cetera, and so on, and they were always leaders in those activities. And they were always leaders together as a team. So when you see them working and talking and her saying we in the conversations on the film where they're talking about we, that was their life for 57 years. And it's an amazing example to my wife and I, who we're together now about 35 years, married for a few less than that. I was lucky enough to marry into an incredible family. And the frankness that you see was ongoing every day. Dick and I had a great relationship. I always called him my second father. We were extremely irreverent with each other, so a lot of what you don't see in there is the really funny jokes around the casket making, et cetera. But that was the way that we dealt with it. He and I dealt with it, and everybody has their means of doing so. But to be able to participate in this process was one of the great experiences of my life. And I had no idea that it would be until it happened. And I worked as a firefighter for about 30 years, and so I had seen my share of death, but I'd always seen it in a disconnected way. And so going through this process and seeing it up close and personal, actually, I used this phrase once before, but it washed a lot of demons away from me that I had in my mind. And so I don't say I encourage people to take this option. I encourage people to make their own choice. So, thanks.
Yes, you.
Thank you again for sharing your story, all of you. My question has to do with the legislation and the fact that this is only available in, I believe, 5 states. And does the film talk about that? And do you all have any suggestions about how we start the process in states that don't have these laws in place?
I can, let me just give a short piece and then you guys can pick it up. Much of the legislation is done with the guidance of a national organization called Compassion and Choices, and they tend to be the group that is a spearhead for this kind of legislation. And I think more states have recently been added, so you might check that. But Compassion and Choices has they actually have a how-to, the recipe, what you need to do, what the process is, and all that. But they don't advocate that. They advocate choice, but they don't advocate that everybody take that choice. I'll let you guys take it.
I think, and there has been a number of states that have been added to that list. I think it's up to 7 now, including the District of Columbia. And there's legislation in New York, there's legislation in Massachusetts. This is something, I mean, when the law passed in California, it was one of those moments where as California goes, so goes the rest of the country in some way, because it's such a big part of our country. The film itself is not about the legislation. The film itself is about life. So we don't take a point of view on that. But I think it is important for people to touch death more in their lives. And if the film can be part of that and part of the thinking around how people consider this legislation, I think it would be really useful.
And that much of, just so that people who haven't had the benefit of seeing it, but absolutely all I know will, that a lot of the stories, the other stories, are about how we're marking the end of our lives.
Right, and I would add that the other 5 stories are not about medical aid in dying. So this is not a film about medical aid in dying. That was the piece that we chose to show here today. All of the pieces, though, speak to some issue of trying to take control of the end of life.
Will this be shown in the theaters or only on television?
This will be shown on HBO on okay, a little promotion, on August 14th, and it will be the whole film, which is 6 ways. 6 different stories.
Okay. Yes, you had a question here.
Again, thank you very much for sharing your story. In making the decision, both for the family and the filmmakers, to take what is typically a very private and very personal family experience and choosing to make it available for a wide audience, what are your hopes and expectations for when people see this film? What are they going to take away from it, or what are your hopes?
There's a lot to say to that, and I think that what we hope at the bare minimum is that this begins a conversation. Death is something that we in this country don't do particularly well. We don't talk about it. We like to push it away. And it is something where we all share that we're all going to do that at some point in our lives. It is part of life. And so I think that we would like this to be something that at least starts a conversation about death.
I think that's the essential part. Like, talk about it. Talk about it with your kids. Talk about it with your spouse. Talk about it with your friends. No matter what part of the political spectrum you're from, the religious spectrum, like in the United States, we don't do death all that well. And we have mediators we put between us and the process. We have a distance and a fear. And Delua and Dick and their family were I learned so much about how to talk and how to be frank and how to discuss these things. And it's led to conversations in my own family that I just know will be so much more helpful down the road. And it's something that's true throughout all the different stories in the film as well, is that these are people who are trying to figure it out and trying to do death better. And I think that's what we need to do.
What is the meaning of 6 ways to die?
It's just, I'll repeat your question, or you'll repeat your question.
The title of this is 6 New Ways to Die in America.
Because there's 6 different stories. You've seen one of the 6 stories today. There are 5 additional stories, all telling different ways that people have chosen to experience the end of life.
Well, again, thank you for sharing this, and it's a very brave thing to do.
I think we'll take one more question. There's a gentleman who's been waiting patiently.
This really isn't a question. I'm a practicing clinical psychologist, and I think I speak for everybody in this room. This is the most incredible display of love, strength, and dignity that I have ever seen. And I thank you for sharing that with us.
Well, we had hoped that this would be a conversation and a conversation starter. And I think that we've accomplished both. Thank you so much. Thank you to all of you. And I hope you're leaving feeling empowered and inspired and comforted. So thank you for being here.